Welcome, 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 everybody. Thank you so much for coming here today. I am so excited about what the evening is going to be for us. I think there's so much to learn. There are going to be people to meet, networking to happen. You've done some already, but afterwards as well. I'm David Cash. I'm the Dean of the McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies here at UMass Boston, and I'm also part of the Sustainable Solutions Lab, a new and innovative interdisciplinary cross-college effort that we're doing here on campus to better leverage research for on-the-ground decision-making, both locally and globally. You'll hear more about that as we move through our program. And I'm here to kick off the evening by introducing Dr. Jean McCormick. Dr. McCormick is the president of this august and gorgeous institution that you're in right now. It is the living and breathing vision of Senator Ted Kennedy, who was at the forefront of so many important policies and legislation, whether it was civil rights or about economic justice, of course, for healthcare. And while some might know, he was a total champion on climate change as well. And up until his last days was working on climate change issues. And so it's very, very fitting that we're holding this meeting here. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jean McCormick.
Well, David is right. I think Senator Kennedy would be very pleased. I know every time we have a group from UMass Boston, our good friends and neighbors who welcomed us here, we're excited to have you here. How many of you this is the first time you're seeing the inside of the chamber? Oh, you have to come more often. Senator Kennedy wanted an institute. He said, first of all, I do not want something that just celebrates me. I want a place that really celebrates the institution that I love, that is the United States Senate. And I believe if people actually have the opportunity to come and sit in the chair and actually try to pass a bit of legislation, and we have programs where you do that, they will understand what our founding fathers were trying to do and perhaps be less cynical about what doesn't get done in government, and the process of how it gets done is meant to be slow and thoughtful. Maybe not quite as slow as it's been recently. And I was, I'm a lifelong educator, having retired as the Chancellor of UMass Dartmouth, and I was not sure about how it would happen, but I have to say it's magic every day. Our general visitors, who could be from 8 to 88, participate in a program here called Today's Vote, and they get up and they say the most profound things about all kinds of legislation. We take up legislation that is currently in front of the Senate today. You won't be surprised that here in Massachusetts every day we pass immigration reform. But it's really interesting. In the summer, when we have people from all over the country, we hear all kinds of different perspectives about that. We have students here every day, and they spend 2.5 hours. They actually get sworn in and assigned to be a particular senator. They have a tablet. They know what that senator thinks. They know what that state thinks, and they go out to their committees and their caucuses, and they go away with a much greater understanding about the complexity of trying to pass a bill. You have to represent your own interest, your party's interest, your state's interest, and above all, the United States' interest. So we're having a lot of fun here. It's really great for me to be back on the UMass Boston campus where I spent 20 years. And we want to welcome you. We're open every day except Monday for regular visitors. And if you have a school group, it's free for everyone under the age of 18. It's also free for every faculty and staff person of UMass Boston. So do come and visit. I think what Senator Kennedy hoped for was that we would inspire a next generation of people to public service and to civic engagement. I was just telling someone we had 100 students from New Hampshire the other day, and we've put out a new exhibit on the current election, and so you can have a ball and you can vote for Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or Ted Cruz. Donald Trump is winning hands down. So every day we say to ourselves, no making faces. We're encouraging everybody to vote. And so if you want to participate in our Pledge to Vote campaign, it'll be running, and everybody says, I pledge to vote because, and what will be a success for us if more people are civically engaged. We are really excited that we have an opportunity to have Christina here, to have this important topic talked about, and to partner with the McCormick School. So welcome everyone, and don't be a stranger.
So just being in this room is an inspiration, and I'm hoping that the rest of the evening follows up on that. We are at a crossroads. We are at a crossroads. There's no question about that. We know that our path must take us to a carbon-free future. There's no longer a dispute about that. But what might that path look like? What will it take to be essentially carbon-free, while at the same time advancing social equity, economic development, peace, and ecological sustainability? Not an easy task. We know that to get on that path, bold and unprecedented action will be required. Paradigms will have to shift. Economic, technological, political, cultural, and social transformations will have to occur. And the good news is that's already happening. This past year saw more renewable energy on the global grid than at any other point, and it surpassed new fossil fuel, new generation. That's huge. More than ever, we're seeing clean energy innovation happening. We're seeing clean energy jobs and businesses exploding, not just here in Massachusetts, but all over the world. We're seeing developed and developing countries working toward a clean energy future for their communities, for jobs, in education. It's happening all over the world. We're seeing all over the world big benefits from switching to dirty fossil fuel with incredibly volatile prices to more even renewable energy, energy efficiency. We're seeing all kinds of new innovations coming. And what we've also seen in the last year is a meaningful watershed global agreement crafted, negotiated, painstakingly pieced together in Paris last December by our honored guest, Christiana Figueres. And she will tell us something about how to travel further and faster on that path. We're here today to learn more about what that path might look like. We're also here to take that learning and spread it back to our communities and look at the communities that we represent. I was going through the list of almost the 400 people who registered for this event. And if you look around, you're surrounded by teachers and students and healthcare professionals and engineers and activists and lawyers and clergy and architects and tradespeople and researchers and financial analysts and community organizers and clean energy CEOs. And I will bet that I only mentioned half of the categories that are here. That is remarkable. Remarkable that people from Boston, from Massachusetts, from out of this state, and from other countries are here today, that people young and not so young are here as well. And when we leave here, we should be communicating what we've heard. In fact, while you're here, communicate what you're hearing and seeing. Now, some of you who are trying to do that might have noticed that you can't get on wireless, so go to EMKGST, and the password is 617-740-7000. Because we need to remember that local and global impact of our conversation, we have to sustain it. So don't hesitate to use your smartphones. Use the technology that we have to pass the word. Tweet while you're here. Tweet when you hear something interesting. Tweet a nice photo. Use the hashtags, use the tags at @CFigueres, that's a good one, at @SSL_UMB, or at at McCormick Grad. And hashtag Paris Agreement or hashtag climate is what's been used already today as we've been working up to this event. So before I call up the Chancellor of UMass Boston, there's a couple of people that I need to thank. First of all, this new organization, the Sustainable Solutions Lab, there are a couple of key leaders who are here. Bob Massey in the front row, our executive director. Paul Kirshen, I think, is hiding up top there, our academic director. But what's remarkable about the program, it's brought together 4 colleges on campus. I think 3 of the 4 deans are here, Dean Robin Hannigan, Dean David Turkla. I'm here, and several faculty members, Professor David Levy and Professor Maria Ivanova, who you'll hear from, and Rebecca Hurst, who has been managing our whole shop since we started. I also want to thank Rochelle Brown, who I'm not sure she's in here because she's making sure everything is working. She's the one who you've seen with an iPad walking around, making sure I'm in the right place at the right time. There's been a whole host of UMass and McCormick grad school staff and students who have helped out. Allie Duffy from the Chancellor's Office has been incredibly helpful, and of course, the team at the EMK Institute have been incredible. I also want to note that there are a couple of people here, all of us, I am sure, have been working on this, but some in particular who I know that I've crossed paths with and have been very important leaders in Massachusetts. Senator Mark Pacheco is here, the chair of the Global Warming Committee in the state legislature. I know that there are state agency staff here. I know there are a bunch of you. Raise your hand if you work for a state agency or one of the Mass Clean Energy Center. Come on, you guys. Thank you very much. Awesome work these guys have done. From the city of Boston, huge leader. They received an award in Paris during the agreement. I see that Austin has come in and Atia have come in as well. Thank you very much for Boston. Anybody else from Boston who works for the city or the city council? Great. Okay. So our next speaker who is going to continue introducing the evening is Chancellor Keith Motley. He knows about paths to change. In fact, he's always proud of the very muddy paths that we have on our own campus. And these muddy paths from which will rise new buildings, new programs, new research. His vision is sparking educational innovation, a global reach, and a link to global communities. A combination that's rare to find. So please join me in welcoming the Chancellor of Boston's only public research university, Keith Motley.
So, good evening, everybody. What an unbelievable group of wonderful human beings you represent tonight. Look at this. You know, I love standing up here and just imagining what it must feel like to do this down in Washington, D.C., or to do it down in the State House with you, Senator. Thank you all. Thank you, Dean Cash. Thank you for being tonight. Thanks for that kind introduction. Thanks for all that you're doing to elevate the McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies. Now, Dean Cash mentioned that 4 deans came together, and all of that faculty around this issue. Mr. Massey, I'm telling you, what a wonderful opportunity for us as a university. What a wonderful opportunity as a chancellor to see that happening. You can go away from here and say at your university, at this Commonwealth's capital city urban public research university, you saw this in action. Faculty members working across disciplines, deans sitting at the same table, developing what you see tonight. I should note, since you were up here, I'll talk about you, that our master's program in public administration recently climbed 10 spots on the U.S. News and World Report's top 100 list. You know, chancellors do that. And now we're number 77 in the country, but it's number 2 here in this region among all public universities in the Northeast, and number 5 across the region. So I got that commercial in. Are you okay with that? Then I'm okay too. We're so proud of that. Welcome home, Dr. Christiana Figueres. We're so grateful to have you here. And to all you first-timers, Thank you for coming. Go out and tell somebody about this space. But also, as Dean Cash said, tweet it out, move from this place and go out from here and let them know about the Edward M. Kennedy Institute, run so wonderfully by my colleague and someone who's been like a sister to me, Jean McCormick. We're so grateful to have you out here. Give her a round of applause for this space. So, Dr. Figueres, we could say welcome back, but it's home for you. You've been here 3 times in the last 4 years. We are so grateful to you for understanding what home means and that the University of Massachusetts Boston just adores you, and we're so grateful for your presence here. We're in for an inspiring conversation this evening. When Christiana gave the Slomoff Lecture on climate action in 2013, she moved one of our distinguished faculty, Professor David Motz, to donate his last salary before retirement to our Center for Governance and Sustainability to support an assessment of countries' performances on international environmental obligations. That is a wonderful thing. That research led to tools that now help political leaders implement the Paris Agreement, Christiana's milestone achievement. So as you can see, our friendship with you, Christiana, runs deep. Some of you may have heard that Christiana's keynote address when she accepted an honorary degree from our university at our 46th commencement exercise was unbelievable. She enlightened our graduates by saying there is no greater power than the power of choice. She urged us to embrace our higher sense of purpose as we make personal, public, and planetary choices. Christiana, we carried your words with us ever since, and we're so grateful you are back today to share the progress you see happening around the world. This issue is not only global, it has local implications for our university, and each day we arrive at this peninsula, a stone's throw from downtown Boston, overlooking Dorchester Bay. We're reminded of the need to be vigilant of the signs telling us our climate is changing. We must monitor climbing temperatures. We must monitor those 60-mile-per-hour winds when it's blowing at 10 miles per hour somewhere else out here. We must monitor the rising sea levels, increasingly severe weather patterns, but we must also make plans to combat the consequences of those changes. As the Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, you oversee the strategies being constructed at the international level. You've been instrumental in crafting the historic Paris Agreement adopted by 195 countries last December. All of the world's nations committed to an ambitious goal of net zero global emissions in the second half of this century. No one thought such an agreement was possible, but you did. You managed to change the world because you believed in our power and our capability and capacity to transform and rise to new heights. These two are our core values here at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and we're proud to follow you and follow your lead. Several members of our university community were direct witnesses of this history that was unfurled in Paris, and thank you for making sure that that could happen for us. I had to hear from Dean Cash that he was on his way. Then I heard that he was there. Then I heard that he was participating as part of that summit with a clean energy delegation. And then McCormick Professor Maria Ivanova, who you're going to hear from in a moment, also participated. But we don't just do it with our faculty and our deans. Our students were there too. Natalia Escobar Pemberthy was there. She's a PhD candidate in global governance and human security, and we're so proud that she was able to experience that as well. They took away many lessons that they are now translating into action within our university community, but also within impacted communities around the globe. And so they have held an Environmental Diplomacy Institute in January in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and we are so proud of that. And I'm so jealous of that as Chancellor that I wasn't able to go with you guys. So take me the next time. The University of Massachusetts Boston has made tremendous progress to reduce energy use, increase renewable energy generation, and expand educational opportunities around sustainability. Our entire University of Massachusetts system has committed to divesting from coal. We keep moving forward through collaboration, engagement, and honesty about the challenges we face by listening, lending a hand, and being there for our community. We are getting things done. We take lots of pride in our deep local roots and in our global reach, in our diversity and in our integrity, and in our commitment to the public good. We engage through our students from 150 different countries who speak 90 different languages, through our faculty and staff who work across disciplines, scales, and geographies, and through our alumni and partners who push us to be bolder and push us to be better. We provide thoughtful academic space that nurtures reflection and connection to the natural and human world all around us. We seek solutions to global problems and continue to ask, as President John F. Kennedy, whose library is just across the walkway, urged us to, not only why, but why not? Christiana, we are inspired by your vision, and we're empowered by your engagement with our faculty and our students. We are ready to work with you in the next stage of implementing the groundbreaking climate agreement that you brokered in Paris. And tonight, we're so happy to welcome you back home. Welcome home. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of this journey with you. Thank you.
Next, I want to invite up someone who has actually spent years working with Christiana Figueres, Professor Maria Ivanova. She has been working in the global governance and environment space for decades. She started by launching a global environmental governance project while a master's student at Yale. She joined our faculty in 2010 and was part of a team that created a new PhD program on global governance and human security. There are now 38 students from 17 countries. She started the Center for Governance and Sustainability that has been driving outreach with international organizations, research-driven, policy-driven research that brings together the kind of focus that she has to the UN and to other international organizations. She's part of that family of faculty, and many of you I see in here from UMass Boston who are dedicated to the mission of linking research to real decision-making. Please join me in welcoming Professor Maria Ivanova.
Thank you. Tonight, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome back Christiana Figueres for an event that celebrates her astonishing achievement of catalyzing a planetary climate agreement where no one thought one was possible. Christiana Figueres took over as the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Climate Change Convention at the lowest point of the climate regime, in 2010, just months after the climate summit in Copenhagen, where member states could not agree on who is responsible for causing climate change, who is affected by it, and who should act. They left the Danish capital with an outcome that was not adopted, but taken note of. 5 years later, in December 2015, 195 countries unanimously agreed and adopted the ambitious Paris Climate Agreement, which set a long-term goal of keeping temperatures well below 2 degrees Celsius, articulated the intent to reduce that to 1.5 degrees, and committed countries to net zero emissions in the second half of this century. This tectonic shift happened because of unprecedented leadership. Christiana Figueres began changing the narrative about climate change from one of sacrifice to one of opportunity, and triggered a race to the top. She articulated a moral imperative to act in solidarity with those affected, in solidarity with small island developing states, and a high ambition coalition was formed in Paris. As a result, companies, cities, and countries stepped forward to lead the transition to a new low-carbon economy. The debate was no longer about who is responsible to act, but about who is willing or unwilling to act. And nobody wanted to be seen as the unwilling to act. Another exceptional climate leader, and someone who lives in Boston, recently pointed out that UMass Boston is seen as a refreshingly unstuffy place where people are serious about getting things done. We are proud to call Christiana Figueres our own because we share a vision, values, and particular ways of getting things done. We share a vision of transformation of the economy, of society, of education, that requires the empowerment of ourselves and of others. We share values of service to the communities that we are part of, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And we believe that the way forward through complexity and chaos is through simplicity of purpose, through empathy and engagement of our whole selves. Dear Christiana, we bring our hearts, our minds, and our hands to you to imagine and to implement the transformation to sustainability that you have launched. And this is why we have all gathered here tonight. Welcome home.
Well, you certainly can't start with dry eyes after that. Thank you very, very much. This is my usual first act. Bring the microphone down, particularly after the Chancellor has been up here. So good evening to all of you. I am truly delighted to be back in the land of the wicked. Senator, what an honor to have you here. Thank you very, very much. Chancellor Keith Motley, you all know, of course, that UMass is the only public research institution in Boston. But did you also know that Chancellor Motley is the only shy chancellor in the whole of Massachusetts, or perhaps in the whole of the US? He's won many awards for his, shrinking violet nature. Thank you very much for your warm welcome. And Provost, where is our fantastic Provost? Provost, it is wonderful to see you again. Thank you so much. And Dr. McCormick, thank you for lending this absolutely glorious space to us today. Dean Cash and other deans, thank you so much. And to many friends, I see many friends here today, some friends of decades who I hadn't seen in decades, so it's wonderful to come back and see some friends, and in particular students, faculty, and staff. Chancellor, you know, I have to deal with diplomacy, and one of the things that I was taught is that you never put people on the spot publicly. However, since I'm known for not being terribly diplomatic, I would like to make an announcement here that maybe I should have asked you before. But here we go. Your only way out is to say yes. So here's my announcement. Since University Mass Boston was generous, so generous, to grant me an honorary doctorate degree, and yet I did not have the privilege of attending UMass, I have made what we call in the UN a unilateral decision, that means an unconsulted decision, that I am going to call UMass my adopted alma mater, despite the fact that I never came, I never attended. But you know what? I've been almost more here than I have been in my own office for 4 years. So this is henceforth my adopted alma mater, and I am honored. So that's a yes, I guess. And what a fantastic, fantastic space today to be here in the Ed Kennedy Institute, hosted by the John McCormick School of Policy and Global Studies. Two fantastic men, two distinguished men in the history of U.S. Policy, who truly served with a capital S, served the public interest for more than 40 years in the Senate and the House, respectively, and who were such distinguished architects of what we could call the social contract of the United States of the last century, the domestic social contract of the 20th century. Perhaps best known through the Great Society programs that they both championed, certainly working on very, very difficult issues of the time, poverty eradication in the United States and racial injustice, where one could say perhaps not yet a complete and perfect task, but certainly one that moved forward quite impressively under their leadership. And today, as we look forward into the 21st century, I think we would do ourselves a favor by building on the achievement of these two very distinguished men and taking inspiration from the work that they did here to dedicate ourselves to the global challenges of this century, the 21st century. Because today, we must recognize that the complexity of what we have in front of us has grown exponentially as compared to what we had in the 20th century. And it has grown exponentially not only because we are increasingly interconnected, that is certainly true, but perhaps more importantly, because we're increasingly interdependent, which goes way beyond being interconnected. You know, geologists have already acknowledged that we have moved into a new geological era, which is being called the Anthropocene. And that should really give us a moment of pause, because the Anthropocene is the geological era that we're all in right now, where we humans have managed to change the nature of nature. We humans have managed to now determine, out of our own actions, we are determining the evolution of the planet for the first time in the history of the planet. And in this era of such vast and far-reaching impact of human activity, I think you will agree with me that we must understand that the impact of national actions and policies go way beyond national boundaries. We are at a point in history where national policies and actions have planetary repercussions. So we can no longer enact policy that perhaps lifts millions in one country if that benefit comes at the cost of billions around the world. That is fundamentally the message of the Paris Agreement. I'm not going to go into the construction of the agreement, which I'm happy to do with you after in the question and answer period. I thought actually that we would dedicate a little of this time to thinking a little bit above the Paris Agreement to, in this new era of human impact and human agency, what is the relationship between the challenges that we have on climate and the challenges that we have on a planetary level of development? Because the fact is that the development challenges that we face today can only be quantified in billions. So we have 1 billion people who still, today, in 2015, still have no access to clean water. We have 1 billion people who still, today, in 2015, do not have enough food to be healthy. We have 1.3 billion people who still, today, in 2015, do not have access to electricity. And of course, what that means is that we have 1 billion people in extreme poverty, meaning that they're surviving on $1 a day. This is 2015. How is that possible? How is it tolerable? How is it justifiable? It shouldn't. It absolutely shouldn't. And the daunting task that we have in front of us is that unless we're able to address climate change in a timely fashion, those numbers could increase, both because of population, but perhaps even more significantly because of unabated climate change, which is going to magnify the most basic of inequalities, meaning we would be transgressing on human rights to the point where it would be very difficult to define ourselves as human anymore if we allow that to happen. So we have two options. Option number one, we continue merrily along in this century with 20th century technology, with high carbon solutions that have little or no resilience whatsoever, with the consequence that those solutions to the planetary challenges would be A, temporary, because they will be wiped out by increasing natural disasters, and we would be condemned to play catch-up continually, because natural disasters will continue to wipe out the very basic infrastructure, particularly that the most vulnerable need, their homes, their access, where they live, their food sources, and we would have to continuously rebuild the very, very basic without being able to develop, i.e., without ever being able to live in a world that has eradicated poverty. That would be the consequence, without any exaggeration. Or we could go with option 2, which is pay tribute and honor to what we did in the 20th century, pay tribute and honor to the development and the benefit that has come from fossil fuels, and at the same time recognize that we're now in a new era and that the solutions of the past can no longer be the solutions of the future. And that we would have to develop a 21st century approach that is actually based on low carbon technologies and resilient infrastructure. That would mean that we would tackle climate change not as an end in itself, not for the purpose exclusively of tackling climate change, but that we would achieve emissions reductions and a much more resilient society, both socially, economically, and physically, using those measures and those activities as the means through which we deliver and secure development results. That is fundamentally the relationship between those two. Now, fortunately, last year, in 2015, the world finally chose a path. You know, did I say before that we were still in 2015? I think I did. You know, I have lived my life for so many years focusing on 2015. We're now in 2016. So in 2015, which was last year, the last time I looked, 2015, the world actually did choose between these two paths. And in that year, first in September and then in December in Paris, the governments of the world, at least the governments of the world, from the global policy perspective, did adopt what we call the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. The SDGs, let's understand those, the Sustainable Development Goals, as the aspirational vision of the kind of society that we would like to have. The Paris Agreement on Climate Change, let's understand that to be a legally binding path of decarbonization for the entire global economy. And when we recall that that text was agreed, unanimously by 195 countries, as distinct from each other as anything you've ever seen. Contrast Palau to China, to the United States, or to the European Union. Completely different realities. And yet they were able to come together, 195 nations, and unanimously adopt a legally binding agreement that the purpose of which is to intentionally change the course of the global economy. Intentionally change the course of the global economy. The last time that we had a global economy transformation, it was the Industrial Revolution, which did not obey a policy choice. It was because we discovered fossil fuels, and then we developed technology, including the internal combustion engine, to take advantage of those fossil fuels that we had developed, that we had discovered. But it was a transformation of the global economy that came basically because of the forces of the market, supply and demand, but not because of an intentional political policy decision. This is the first time in the history of mankind that we as humans have been able to rise to the challenge, to truly seek our higher purpose, and be able to make a decision intentionally to change henceforth the trajectory of the global economy. So we understand that the SDGs and the Paris Agreement can be considered, if you see it from the perspective of the social contract that the United States developed in the second half of last century. One can understand that now what we have in front of us are the two pillars of the social contract of the 21st century, not for one country, but for the world, because of our interdependence. And that global social contract for the 21st century seeks to eradicate poverty. It seeks to put woman, man, and child at the center of development, and it seeks to decouple greenhouse gases from GDP, understood in its broadest sense and not in a very narrow measurement sense. A daunting task, a high vision put forward by governments with the support of private sector, subnationals, and all other stakeholders. And it is, in fact, for those who work on global studies and policy, it is the most exciting of times. It's a very, very exciting moment because we are beginning to see now the power of policy. We're beginning to see how policy can actually affect change. Responding to science, a huge change from where we were in Copenhagen. This is global policy that is responding to science. This is global policy that is setting the course unequivocally. Unequivocally, we are moving toward a decarbonized society. This is a global policy that is setting the tone, unequivocally collaborative. If there was anything that was transformational about the process of getting to the Paris Agreement, is the fact that we all realized that certainly national governments have a big role to play, but that they are incapable of putting forward this transformation on their own, that they need everyone else to come on board, as everyone did. So with a very marked course, with a very clear collaborative tone, one can understand that this global policy is actually giving a signal to the corporate world and to everyone else that we have a clear direction for the evolution of society and certainly for the global economy, and that we have a new manner of engagement. It is, in fact, I would say, a clarion call now to human ingenuity, because the global framework is set. It will have to be ratified and go into force. We can talk about that in the question and answer period. But it is very clear that this is a call to human ingenuity. So may I call upon your imagination? Can you imagine the cities that we're going to be seeing this century? These are cities that will not be characterized by urban sprawl. They will be urban gardens. They will have the capacity to produce as much or more food as is needed in the city. They will have the capacity to recycle the water. We will be living in cities that are actually built for woman, man, and child, not for car, bridge, and building. A very different concept of urban design. Can you imagine rural communities that live right next to solar panels that are raised 2 to 3 meters off the ground so that they can produce shade underneath, making the soil underneath fertile again, such that you can produce food under the solar panels, or you can have grass growing so that you can let out your sheep or your cows. That's the kind of community that we're going to be having actually very, very soon. Can you imagine buildings where every single building will produce the energy that it needs, plus some, to give over to somebody else in the neighborhood? Can you imagine transportation that is going to be A, electrified, B, shared? Thank you, Robin Chase, for all the work that you're doing there. Shared, and C, autonomous transportation, so that we don't have to waste. I just spent 4 days in my absolutely fantastic native land, in a nightmare of traffic chaos. It takes 2 hours to cross the city, 2 hours in which you're being completely ineffective and inefficient with respect to economic productivity. So that whole system of transportation can and will change because we already have human ingenuity destined and determined to change that. Can you imagine for those 1 billion people who do not have clean water to drink, can you imagine what it is for them to have a small little canister that uses the power of the sun, and that's it, to purify water and have constantly purified water? Can you imagine a world in which every single home has electricity? Every home has electricity because they have either a little solar panel or they're connected to a small wind turbine or they have a small micro hydro, but every home has electricity. You know what that means? That means that every child can study at night. That's a completely different society than the one that we have right now. And closest to my heart, can you imagine a world in which no woman has to cook on an open fire? Because I will have you know that 50% of all women in the world, not in the developing countries, 50% of all women in the world are still cooking on open fires. Completely unacceptable. So that's the kind of world that we are moving into because we will be able to use the 2 pillars of the social contract to work with each other to transform the world and the society that we have known. And it is, in fact, already happening. We already have $300 billion already invested into renewable energy and growing. We already have, to give you specific examples that are somewhat startling, Morocco, not exactly a powerhouse country, has just turned on the switch to the largest concentrated solar power plant in the world that when it is fully built out will have 500 megawatts of electricity completely from solar power. The United Arab Emirates, I was there just before Paris, or was it after Paris? After Paris. After Paris, and the Crown Prince announced that he wants to be alive when the United Arab Emirates exports its last barrel of oil. Just 10 days ago, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia announced that Saudi Arabia has capitalized a fund to the tune of $2 trillion to prepare for Saudi Arabia post-oil. And how are they capitalizing that? They are going to sell off their fossil fuel companies. Would you have believed that even just 3 to 4, 6 months ago? We are in the middle of a transition. Can you believe that electric vehicles that are going to cost $35,000 and are only going to be online and in the market 20 months from now already have 100,000 pre-orders for them? My friends, we are in a totally accelerating transition mode. And it's perhaps not evident if you are just going around your daily business, but just keep track. My invitation is, you know, the news always is, well, not always, is most always negative, but I invite you to follow the good news on the transformation that we are seeing. And it is messy, granted, we can talk about the messiness. All transitions are messy. But it is true that never before in the history of mankind have we had the transformational opportunity to lift billions out of poverty. Billions out of poverty in a way that is long-lasting and that will not leave anyone behind, because the Industrial Revolution left a lot of people behind. This cannot happen again. So let me close by quoting John McCormack. I'm concerned with those who will come after me. The kind of world they are going to live in is dependent on the soundness of judgment of those in a position of responsibility here. Well, who is in a position of responsibility now? Frankly, all of us. Every single human being alive right now shares a responsibility to ensure that what we leave behind is substantially better than that which we have inherited. And to the students who are here, to the young generation who is here, let me say, you are the first generation that enters the productive economy in full knowledge that you are walking into a planet that is irreversibly changed. You are the first generation. Our generation had to learn. We didn't know. We inherited it, and we had to learn. We had to understand the impacts of climate change, and we had to pull ourselves from our bootstraps and make sure that we did the best that we could. Frankly, we have not done enough. But I'm actually both pained and excited for the new generation, for the young generation, because can you imagine the number of new industries that are going to be created? Can you imagine the number of new professions that you are going to have available to you? Can you imagine that any profession that you choose to go into or have already chosen, whether it is health, urban design, agriculture, information technology, energy, engineering, public policy, law, any single profession, you have the cards in your hand to solve this. And you will. Our generation had the responsibility to understand. Your generation can turn that into the greatest opportunity that this planet has ever seen. I thank all of those in my generation who have worked so hard, and there are many here who have done that. And I put my full trust into the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. Yes, you're going to be coming back up here. So we have a chunk of time for question and answers. There is a microphone in the middle here. I believe there's a microphone up top in the middle. Is that correct? Where is it? Over there? I see. Okay, it's over there on the side. So if you would like to ask a question of Christiana Figueres, please step up to the microphone that's nearest to you, and we'll take it.
Ask me a question that doesn't make me emotional again, okay? Can you please ask me a technical question?
First of all, thank you very, very much for coming here.
Please introduce yourself when you step up to the mic.
Kamal Baba from Biology Department at University of Massachusetts, Boston. So we are very grateful to you for coming here, and thank you very much for your very moving and inspiring vision for the future. Very grateful to you. I think what you have said is possible. This is the only way out. Those of us who work in the field of sustainability, we have to be very optimistic. And I couldn't agree with you more that we have tremendous opportunities, especially for the young generation. But many of these technologies have been around for some time. You mentioned about cook stoves. We have been working on cook stoves for the last 30 years, trying to replace, trying to make a dent in the lives of those billions of women and families. So what are the sort of 2 or 3 things you see as major constraints that we should worry about, that we should focus on so that we are not let down? And I think especially in terms of the global governance in which United Nations is very much involved, and the national governance, because that is going to be the key to the realization of the vision you have so beautifully espoused.
I think there are 3 critical factors that are going to determine the speed of the transformation. I have no doubt that the transformation is going to occur because it is already underway, it is irreversible, it is unstoppable. I'm not concerned about the direction, I'm concerned about the speed, because if we delay, we have huge negative impacts. So I'm concerned about the speed, not about the direction. And I do think that there are 3 factors that are going to determine the speed. The first is how quickly can we shift capital? In order to be able to address climate change in a timely fashion, we would have to triplicate the investment that we have right now into renewables, which is about 300 billion, triplicate it to $1 trillion a year. That would be the ideal investment that should be going into new renewables per year. So how quickly can we make those shifts, and how can we take off some of the risk that is being perceived by financial institutions in order to make those capital allocations? Second factor is going to be the speed and advance of technology. And I'm actually much more positive about that because I see how much technology is being developed around the world and with what enthusiasm. The cost of technology is coming down, and the spread and impact of technology, of low-cost, low-carbon technology, is actually advancing. And the third, of course, is policy, because now with the Paris Agreement, we do have global policy framework, but that needs to be devolved into local policy, national policy, community policy, personal policy, because we all need to live according to our own personal policy. And so those 3 things, I think, are the ones that are going to determine the speed, but not the direction. The direction is set.
Yeah, the question up top, please.
Hello, my name is Philip Duguay. I work for the Quebec government here in New England, but my question is very academic. First of all, thank you so much for coming here. It's so important to have this message from Paris coming home to this region, the Northeast here. I've been very lucky in my young life. I've lived all over the world. I spent 2.5 years in sub-Saharan Africa in some reasonably conflict-prone regions. Also lived in Indonesia for a while after the tsunami, and I've traveled in Latin America and other places. Everywhere that I've seen conflict, I've seen exploding population and dwindling resource bases. And I find that sometimes conflicts are kind of portrayed as, oh, this is an ethnic conflict, or this is, whatever, a religious conflict. But frequently it's conflict over resources, and this speech that you've given is really about the promotion of the circular economy. That's the new nomenclature we hear all the time, and that's really important. But what is the role of the UN, and what is the role of population control is what I'm driving at here in the climate debate? And how come, just to give you an anecdote from the local region here, there's a comedian from 10 miles down the road, Bill Burr, from Canton, Mass. And he's got a very off-color series of comedic sketches about population control. And it's pretty hard to run for office saying you want to eliminate people. So, I'm very curious to hear about your take on this important part of the picture about sustainability. Thank you.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that's why I mentioned that there were two factors that are going to exacerbate global inequality, and they are climate change and population growth. And population growth or population control, whichever way you want to see it or express it, has not been a part of that conversation for reasons that you have already expressed, but that you can also imagine. It is most painful to realize that it is precisely those populations and those countries that are most vulnerable who have the highest rate of population increase, and they are the ones that are going to have the highest impact. Now, coming from a developing country, I would also like to put on the table that one of the reasons why we in the developing countries have as many children as we do is because we know that some of those won't survive. And we also know that we don't have an established social security system. And our pension, if you will, or our old age security is with one or two of our children. So there are reasons for this. There are societal reasons for it. It doesn't mean that it makes things easier, because we are already beyond the planetary boundaries of what we can do with current food production technology. We will have to improve that. We are already beyond that. But it does make things much more complicated. As you have said, very difficult to impose any limits there, in particular in developing countries where children and larger families are seen as part of the stability of society. So it's a cultural norm.
Thank you. Before we take our next question, I just want to acknowledge, if everyone can please give a warm welcome. Victor Woolridge, who's the chairman of the board of the UMass system, has arrived. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Sir?
My name is Ambrose Spencer, and I have to speak to a group at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in a couple of weeks on climate change and faith. Latin America has clearly articulated a theology of a preferential option for the poor. But I keep asking myself, my friends, and my brothers and my sisters, Christian and non-Christian, what about a complementary option for the rich? What is it that I need to say? My plan is to focus on the early victims of climate change in the far north, the low-lying nations, Bangladesh, Syria, and the other places with refugees, partly because of deteriorating agricultural production as well as other reasons. What am I missing? What else can I do to help people understand that low capital gains taxes are very good for me, but they aren't getting the job done where the needs are seen and where the victims and the families of the victims are suffering because of the way we live and because of the way we use our money? What else should I tell them that they can hear?
Well, it's a very good question, and I think it is, I guess, commonplace, or I don't know if it's even human. that we have a very hard time identifying with something that we deem is very distant. So whether we be distant geographically from Bangladesh, or whether we be distant generationally because we perceive that it is only the generations 2 or 3 or 4 down the line that are going to be hit. So, you know, some do have a much higher sense of moral duty and can understand that. I have come to the conclusion that while that is a very, very important argument, it is not necessarily the argument that is going to make a difference. No. And that is why I have very much emphasized that it is actually in all our interests now to do something about climate. Our interest right here. Yes, it also will have a beneficial effect on Bangladesh and Palau and Samoa. But can we, in addition to that, identify how we will be benefited right now, right here? Because it is a more immediate form of motivation and of leveraging what we need to leverage, which is get out of our comfort zone and do things differently. So I would suggest that without minimizing the impact on others, that we also take a look at how can we be benefited right now and try to use those arguments for those people who understandably are motivated by their own well-being.
Thank you.
I'm noticing that the line is long and getting longer, and I want to maximize the time we can hear from Christiana. So please try to keep your questions sharp and to the point and quick. Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Rebecca, and I'm a graduate student at Boston University's Pardee School of Global Studies. I'm conducting research on the mitigation of emissions from the international maritime shipping sector, a sector that the IMO describes as the most integrated and international of all sectors. These emissions were mentioned in Kyoto, but not in Paris, and they're still not allocated to states. So I was just wondering how you envision the future of these emissions within the UNFCCC, or just the mitigation in general.
So those emissions, both maritime, and I'll just take, you know, for completeness sake, maritime and aviation emissions comprise almost 5% of global emissions. And they are not covered by the legalities of the convention because the convention is predicated on national governments taking responsibility for their national emissions. And because most of those emissions, with the exception of those that are over land, are international, it was impossible from a legal perspective, how would they ever have assumed responsibility or parsed out responsibility? So the work on both of those international emissions was left to ICAO and to IMO respectively. Both ICAO and IMO have been working, and you know much more about IMO than I do, have been working on reducing emissions. My sense is that they are currently still stuck in operational efficiency, which is very good news, but is only one step. They need to be moving toward higher efficiency, both in the shipping industry as well as in the aviation industry, and certainly toward cleaner fuels. So biofuels, fourth generation biofuel without competing with food production is going to have to be a part of this process. And I'm sorry, the Paris Agreement is very long, but if you read the whole thing, all 36 pages, I don't remember what page it's on, but yes, both aviation and maritime emissions are mentioned, but only mentioned, Rebecca, because the convention does not have a legal mandate. But both IMO and ICAO are encouraged to continue their work.
Next question here.
My name is George Mokray. I'm an independent scholar. I publish a weekly that looks at what's happening at the colleges and universities in this area on energy and other events. So a lot of it is about climate change. Saw you 2 years ago or 3 years ago at Harvard, and then you were talking about city scale, which is something that I had been talking about for 2 years. Now you're talking about development and climate change, which is something that I've been talking about. Solar is civil defense. It's also entry-level
Yeah, I like that.
electricity.
I saw that when I walked in. I went, that's
Thank you.
pretty cool.
Now, the editor of this book, Tom Garreau, gave you a copy of this today.
Yes.
And it's called Geotherapy, Innovative Methods of Soil Fertility Restoration, Carbon Sequestration, and Reversing CO2 Increase. Your whole talk.
I did not mention that.
Exactly.
Yes. I did
And-
not mention a whole bunch of other things, but let me tell you something. One of the most critical pieces of the Paris Agreement is actually Article 2 of the Paris Agreement, and thank heavens, after much work, we were able to get that in. Why is Article 2 very important? Because Article 2 speaks about the ultimate vision, the ultimate destination that we want for our planet, and it doesn't say only reduction of emissions. What it says is to recuperate the ecological balance that we have lost between emissions and natural absorption. And that is what we call climate neutrality, carbon neutrality, whatever. But the important thing about that definition is that it points to the fact that we have actually two parallel tracks of action here. One is to bring down emissions from the energy sector, the industrial sector, but the other is precisely, as you have mentioned, to increase the natural capacity of the Earth to absorb emissions, because otherwise we will not be able to get to that zero net. So yes, I apologize that I didn't mention that, but I'm guilty of a long list of things that I didn't mention in my short intervention here. But it is absolutely critical. As you know, it's 20%, or depending on which activities you're talking about of global emissions. And there is a huge absorption capacity there that we have not exploited. So yes, I completely agree, despite the fact that I didn't mention it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'm glad. I thought you might filibuster and just read that whole book here on the Senate floor. Question up top?
Hi, my name is Tara Panisi. During the day, I'm an energy market specialist for a renewable company, and at night, I am a graduate student here at UMass. And I'm hoping that you can answer a question I've had for a long time from my day job.
This doesn't sound good.
It's
Anybody want to volunteer to answer that question before she's been asked?
We've seen that our energy markets here in the United States and our utilities still consider renewables an intermittent power, which means when they're dealing with supply and demand of electricity on a day-to-day basis, they take fossil fuel energy before my own from wind farms. So although my wind farms can produce a certain amount of energy, you will get calls from the markets and the utilities that curtail or limit the amount of energy that I'm capable of producing. And I find that as a problem. Why are we taking renewable power last on the lineup when dealing with this supply and demand, and fossil fuels first? So although the technology exists, our markets are not using it to the full potential. And I'm curious as to how we change that.
Decision, policy, is actually not that difficult. There are, of course, vested interests, and you well understand that the way the business model of a utility works, that's not necessarily in their best interest currently to change that. But I will have you know that there are many countries that are doing that. And I'm sorry to bring my own little country just because I was there again, but in Costa Rica we do have preference for first purchasing renewable energy, and it has made a world of difference. Just a tiny little example, we're now 99% renewable energy. We went 285 days consecutive last year with just renewable energy. It is entirely possible, but you do have to change the business structure and the incentive structure of utilities. How do they make their money in order for them to be able to participate that way? Because it's currently just not the way that they make their profits, that they can charge. So it is not in their interest, but it can be changed. It has been changed. There's a huge battle on this going on in Germany, actually, because utilities are having a very hard time with the huge number of rooftop solar that is being installed in Germany, where people are becoming more and more independent, and the utilities and the transmission companies are having less and less business. So you do understand that there is a tension there. And of course, the more that we have centralized renewable, that will also help. It's actually the distributed renewables that makes the problem. Centralized is not such a problem, it's distributed renewables, for which we need a very, very different incentive structure from the point of view of the business model.
Thank you. Down here, sir.
Hi, my name is Suman Gautam. I'm an energy economist. Thank you for the
You're an energy
economist. Thank you for the heartfelt talk. And I have to confess that this is the first climate change talk after which I can go home with lots of positivity and motivation.
Well, I'm sorry that that is the first one.
Yeah, so my question is regarding least developed countries, which you also mentioned multiple times in your talk about extreme poverty. But I would like to, I was wondering if you can share light from the perspective of leaders and governments of these least developed countries, how serious they are in implementing policies in tackling climate change, and also how much power they have when they come to a negotiating table with other countries.
Well, let me take the second first, because that's pretty easy. In the United Nations, one country, one vote. It is exactly the same whether you are from a small country or from a large country. If you formally object to a decision, the decision does not move forward. Now, what countries tend to do is to form alliances, and Maria mentioned one of the most powerful alliances that we had in Paris, which was the High Ambition Coalition, which was a huge group of countries that really wanted a high ambition agreement, and that were able to bring all the rest of the countries with them. You know, I am every day surprised by how developing countries have understood that it is in their interest to move to renewable energy. Let me just take, for the purpose of this, Exhibit A, small island states. All of those islands, understandably because they're islands, except TNT, Trinidad and Tobago, that has its own oil, but all of the others need to import fossil fuel for their energy generation and for their transportation. So they are paying currently not very high prices for oil, but the transportation prices do not vary. In fact, they continue to go up. So most Pacific Island states are paying 20 to 38 cents a kilowatt hour for energy. It is criminal when they have all the sun in the world beating down upon them. And they have understood this, okay? So they do want to become independent of those imports, independent of the cost of them, and in particular, they want to be able to use their resources much better. So they are moving over toward renewable energy. I think that we will see a huge transformation, particularly in small island states, that will be 100, and many of them are already well on their way, that will be 100% renewable over the next 10 years. Because it is in their own interest. And other countries, that have perhaps larger economies are moving in that direction. I can mention, just to go to the other extreme, China currently has 43 gigawatts of solar installed. They have plans on the books to go to 140 gigawatts, which is impressive given the fact that today total solar installation in the world is 200 gigawatts. And China on its own over the next 4 years is going to get up to 140. So whether small or big, the logic of being energy independent and using your own domestic natural resources is actually taking over the world. Slowly but surely.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Christiana, I'm going to throw something at you like you did with the Chancellor, and do something that I didn't tell you.
Do I say yes right now?
Yeah, you have to say yes.
Yes.
Exactly. So I see there are about 8 or 9 people. Nobody else get in line. We are going to play a speed round of questions and answers, and so you guys have to play too. Really quick question that doesn't have a preamble, and then really quick answer. Are we ready?
Okay, do you want answer by answer? Or do you want?
No, we're going to do it answer by answer. Okay? You ready? Set. Up top. Go.
Thank you very much. My name is Mariana. I'm studying also at Boston University, and I'm interested in climate finance. So, very quick question would be, what is your opinion, or how are you envisioning the Green Climate Fund? That it would in Cancun, it was mentioned as one of the primary vehicles to mobilize investments, but now in Paris and beyond, what is your take on the future of the GCF?
The GCF has had a very hard start. But the good news is that this year they will begin to allocate the first funds to projects, and they are giving priorities to least developed countries and small island states. So it's been a very slow and painful start, but they are finally moving.
Next.
Try to continue the trend. Thank you so much for an inspiring and heartfelt talk. I'm Elizabeth Cooper. I'm a graduate student in the McCormack School. I'm very excited about the Paris Agreement. I'm trying not to have a preamble. Ratification is something that I'm concerned about. We're in a replica of the Senate, and so I wonder if you can say any. I know that's sort of the relationship from the UN to national level ratification, and then implementation below that. There's no formal relationship aside from that. But can you say something about how your leadership can catalyze, coordinate subnational, state level, regional, town level action if what we need is sort of a top-down and bottom-up strategy?
Okay, you asked a question I didn't think you were going to ask. I thought you were going to ask about ratification of the United States. That's not your question.
Well, I guess I was just saying.
You're assuming they're not going to ratify.
Well, or just that it's going to be a slow, painful,
Well, don't I have good news for you? So the United States and China together last week announced that on the 22nd of April, which is the day that we open for signature in New York, both China and the United States will turn up to the United Nations in New York, will sign the agreement, and they will each independently with separate processes join the agreement this year. The United States certainly before the elections, and I think actually even well before the elections. That doesn't mean that it's going to the real Senate floor. Yeah. The way that this was constructed is that the Paris Agreement is fully consistent and coherent with existing regulation in the United States, and the executive will be able to join the agreement in the same way that the United States joined the Minamata Convention based on existing regulation.
Okay, great. Question up top.
Yes, Jorge Colmenares from the Climate Action Business Association and also the MIT Alumni for Climate Action Leadership. I just came from UMass Lowell. They had a forum on carbon pricing. Just want to get your views on the role of carbon pricing in order to decarbonize the global economy.
It would be so effective if we had a global price of carbon. Maybe, most of us wouldn't have had to worry about a Paris Agreement, but it is currently impossible. To have a global price on carbon is just not in the cards. However, we already have 60 jurisdictions around the world that have some kind of a carbon price, 2/3 of them through emission trading and 1/3 through carbon tax. And China, being the largest of them, has 6 carbon markets, city-based, that are actually going to be joined into a national carbon market and hence a national carbon price in China as early as next year. Once we have a price of carbon in China, my suspicion is that that's going to have a ripple effect throughout the world. But the approach that has been given now to carbon pricing is very much of a bottom-up approach where everybody is actually taking advantage of their own strengths and mitigating their weaknesses. And when will we have one single price remains to be seen. Probably we will have fungibility and fungibility between systems before we have a single price. And that may not be such a bad thing.
Great, thank you.
Hopefully here locally in Massachusetts, Senator Pacheco, we have a Massachusetts carbon price.
Rob?
He's nodding, he's nodding.
Rob?
Rob Pratt with the International Institute for Energy Conservation. Thank you so much for your passion and for how effective you've been in your role. Thank you. Political question. Impressive INDC commitments by the countries. One, how do we make sure that they're fulfilled and we actually reach those? And then how do we get to the next round, which we all know is going to be required to get to the 2-degree goal?
So the INDCs are the nationally developed contributions that every country, or almost every country, 189 countries presented out of 196, presented their national climate change plans to the convention and to each other before Paris. And it is one of the 3 big pillars of the Paris Agreement is this collection of national contributions. My sense, Rob, is that because those national contributions are based on national interest and not on some external imposing force, that they will actually be implemented. Those pieces of the NDCs that depend on financial support or technological support will have to receive that. But by and large, that's actually only 25% of the entire reduction that is in that collection of NDCs. So I think, at least 75% of that should be able to go forward, motivated by self-interest and sustainable development goals of those countries themselves. Then, of course, that collection gets us to a temperature increase that is somewhere between 2.7 and 3 degrees, which is much better than where we were before the INDCs, which was at 4 to 5 to 6 degrees temperature increase. So, a good first step, not enough. The second round is actually going to start as early as 2018, because in 2018, the countries will get together again, they will self-assess where they are, how they have progressed, and they will then decide what the new INDC is that they're going to put in place. So they will have an evaluation every 5 years, and 2 years before they have to put in the INDC, they will have a collective evaluation in order to prepare for the next round. And as soon as this goes into force, with 55 countries, at least 55 countries representing 55% of global emissions, it is going to be legally binding that every country increase its ambition every 5 years. So no reverse gear here. It's only first, second, third, or fourth gear.
Great. Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. So one up top, one down here. I apologize to the rest of you, but I know that people are going to be anxious to leave and get on the road. So up top?
Sure. Judith Dolgan, attorney. Thank you. You are a true hero. And I am just wondering if you have any tips for us on an individual level when we find ourselves in conversations with people who either don't think that climate change is something that is a big enough deal to be addressed now, or who think that it's a big deal but that there's nothing that we really can do about it, so what's the point?
Well, if you don't think it's a big issue, just, walk outside. And just, open up your eyes. I think, the temperature changes and the transformation out there is self-explanatory. On personal, there's so many things that you can do as an individual. Your political power, how you vote at every single level, right? How you voted at every level of participation that you have. B, the power of your wallet. How do you vote financially, economically? Are you buying, crappy high carbon technology and services, or are you actually giving preference to those companies, those products, and those services that are low carbon? C, for those of you who are already into the shareholding capacity, what companies do you actually invest in? You should be investing in companies that are actually companies of the future and not companies of the past. And just frankly, just demand. The demand of market is composed, big discovery, by what we all purchase. And collective demand definitely has the capacity and the power to change supply. So the companies will produce what we demand. If our demand is for constantly improving technologies and lower carbon products and services, that's what we're going to get from companies. Why are we expecting the companies to take the lead? We as individuals should actually be taking the lead.
Thank you. Last question.
Good evening. It's an honor to ask you the final question. My name is Kanwar Singh. I work for Hammersley Partners, and I'm also a student in the College of Management as an MBA degree candidate. In our country, obviously, Democrats and Republicans can't agree on whether torture should be illegal or whether government should be snooping on our emails. I'm just amazed with what happened with the Paris Agreement, that nearly 200 countries got together and had a unanimous approval on what we should be doing to fix our climate problem. If you could share some interesting tidbits that happened behind the scenes that were not reported in the media. Again, it's off the record, I believe.
Right.
And also,
Twitter everywhere.
and also if there were moments where you sort of lost faith in humanity and whether we would be able to come to an agreement. So I'd love to hear some behind-the-scenes story on that. Thank you.
Did I ever lose faith? No, I never lost faith. I very often lost my patience because, it's just so self-evident that we need to be doing the right thing. But no, I must tell you, I knew that we were going to get a Paris Agreement a full year before we went to Paris. It was already so evident that we were already in an unstoppable transition and that countries desperately wanted this agreement for many different reasons, but they desperately wanted. My concern was much more around how ambitious and transformative is the agreement going to be. So every night during Paris, the work was how can we insert ambition into the different pieces, and then it had to be taken back to countries to see if they were in agreement with that. And sometimes, we did better than other times, and sometimes we had to completely delete what we thought was a brilliant idea, but that had absolutely no support. But that's the trick, right? You have to constantly play with, first of all, listen very, very carefully to all of the differences, and then try to find a language that brings together, encapsulates what you suspect could be common ground, something that is not offensive to anyone, but that will bring benefit to all. And that's a real trick, to be able to see where that common ground is, and particularly to put it into words. Because, we could all be discussing here what our common ground is on a certain issue, and we think that we have agreed. The moment you put it into words, it's a completely different story. So it's two pieces, right? It's to understand where the common ground could be, but then to put it into words. There were many words that were on paper and then deleted and then back and but that's diplomatic negotiations for you. It's quite fun, exhausting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm actually going to take the MC's prerogative and ask the final question. Christiana, can you, in closing, leave us consistent with the rest of your talk, words of optimism, hope, and inspiration?
Is that like command performance? Well, let me just say, I guess, the same optimism that I have always had. I know that when all of us humans are faced with two paths, and when one path is visibly far superior to the other, when one path brings much more benefit to more people, is much more conducive to the common good than the other, history shows that we humans have always made the right choice. We made the right choice slowly but surely on slavery. We made the right choice slowly but surely on civil rights. We made the right choice slowly but surely on same-sex marriage in this country and moving forward in other countries. And on climate change, we have finally made the right choice. The concern now is, how are we going to implement it? And I actually take heart because a colleague of mine started a little game after Paris where he would begin to ask people, did the Paris Agreement make a difference to you as a person? Has it made a difference to you personally? And invariably, everybody he asked said yes. And the reason why? Because the Paris Agreement has given them hope. And I do think that the Paris Agreement has been an incredible flame of hope for humanity. It certainly saved multilateralism, that's for sure. And it's just given us another window to understand that we don't have to condemn ourselves to the patterns of the past, that we can and we must challenge ourselves to move beyond that, to think out of the box, and to come up with solutions that are incredibly exciting and that will benefit and create a much better world soon. Soon. We cannot delay. We're under incredible time pressure, but human ingenuity is infinite, and I am always impressed and inspired by fantastic ideas that I see, and I'm going to share one last example with you. I was just at Google X a few weeks ago. Do you know Google X has now invested in big wind turbines that actually fly 2 kilometers above the surface of the Earth and pick up much, much higher speed regimes than what we have here. And they are currently investing in reducing the cost of that technology, because currently the winning price on wind energy is 3 cents a kilowatt hour. They think that they can bring it down to 1 cent a kilowatt hour. My friends, if we get clean energy worldwide, because these things can fly anywhere around the planet, if we can get clean energy at 1 cent a kilowatt hour, we have solved the energy problem. And they think that they can do that actually in a couple of years. So what's there not to like about that? Folks, never give up hope. We are the most amazing species that there has lived. Thanks.